practicing integrated pest management on farm. Fantastic. And how many people consider resistant and competitive varieties when they're selecting their species? Or how many people have got a rotation? So what I'm trying to say is you're probably all doing it already. It sounds a bit scary, but it's a whole system and it's a whole suite of approaches. So we'll just kind of get into that here. I might just kick off with just asking you all to introduce yourselves and tell us about what you're up to with integrated pest management.
So my name's Alice and I work for Leaf and I have a fantastic job. Within that, integrated pest management falls within my remit, if you like. We do a range of things around integrated pest management. Firstly, work a lot with researchers, research organisations within specific projects which are furthering what integrated pest management looks like, what some of those techniques that Katie talked about are and how they're developing. We also work with leaf demonstration farmers across the UK who are doing a similar thing. A lot of experimentation in this space is happening on farm, but they're also demonstrating that to other farmers and other groups. We do a lot of events and training, integrated farm management training as well as integrated pest management training. It's hard to say, training as well, and then a lot of different tools and resources, videos, case studies, examples of it happening in action. And our main tool in that area is the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review, which is our overall online management tool that goes through integrated farm management and a big focus on integrated pest management and looking at what some of those techniques are and what you're doing and what you're not doing and that sort of area as well.
I'm Charlotte. I work for AHDB as a crop protection scientist and I work on our pest research programmes. So amongst other things we fund agricultural research, and in terms of crop protection pretty much everything we do has some element of IPM in it. So we fund pest monitoring, pesticide resistance monitoring. We fund research to develop tools and alternative control strategies to sort of help farmers implement IPM practices on farm.
Morning, I'm Sam Cook from Rothamsted Research. I'm an integrated pest management researcher, so I develop or try to develop integrated pest management tools for farmers to use, and I work with farmers to try to develop them on farm and make sure that they work. I work at all four of the main points of IPM, so I'm interested in thresholds and whether they really work. Are they right for farmers? I work on monitoring methods and easier tools to develop, enable thresholds to be validated. I work on preventative methods, particularly interested in crop diversification mechanisms like trap cropping or intercropping. And lastly, I'm working on alternative control methods, particularly trying to encourage the use of conservation biocontrol or the beneficial insects that are all around your farm and help to make those work for you in pest control in the field.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning. My name's Neal Evans. I work for the Voluntary Initiative. This is an industry-funded organisation that works to help you guys use pesticides responsibly. So we're looking to you to use best practice where possible. We have a number of stewardship schemes that some of you are probably aware of, and the Voluntary Initiative also runs a couple of schemes such as Neroso, where we're obviously helping to train and ensure that spray operators use best practice. We have 24,000 Neroso members at the moment. We're also involved in running the National Sprayer Testing Scheme, which, although was first of all was not really seen to be a positive thing. I think you'll now realise that a bit like an MOT, it actually means that your sprayer is doing what it should do. So I'll hand over to Andy.
Hello, Andy Barr. I'm an arable farmer in Mid-Kent. I've got a few sheep as well now. And really I've been interested in IPM for some years. I got very frustrated about spraying insecticides in particular, which were not very specific, and I thought they're just killing everything off, and did a bit of ecology at university, and I was very frustrated at that. So I was trying to find actual ways beyond thresholds, because I get a bit frustrated with thresholds, and if we think we're doing is that really effective if we're just counting, and then we think, well, it's about there, should we just spray anyway? So I've really been trying to find out, other ways, actual practical ways, and actual positive ways that we can control these pests, or in other way, look at it another way and stop them coming in the first place. And at Sam's, I did some courses at Rothamsted some years ago, and what you've seen in the press recently about an insect biodiversity crisis was people at Rothamsted saying that some time ago, and it really is so big, isn't it? If we've got a biodiversity crisis in insects, then farming could be in trouble. So that's where I'm coming from.
Fantastic. So what we'll do is I'll kick us off with a few questions, and then I'll open up to you guys as well. Obviously, it's all happening in your field, so we'd love to hear what you're doing and your questions as well. And then we will have a bit of time at the end to do a bit of ID as well. So we've got some cards on the different natural enemies. So to kick us off, Alice, can you tell us a bit about, oh dear, what is integrated pest management? What are the principles? What are the components of it?
Yeah, sure. I think Andy's given us a fantastic starter and an overview of what that looks like on his farm, and I'm sure he'll talk much more about that. But it's basically a framework and a systems-based approach to pest management rather than just relying on chemicals only. But what it looks like on different farms really, really varies, and it includes a lot of the techniques that Katie sort of quizzed about to kick us off. So in terms of as mentioned, a toolbox of techniques, it's things like prevention, monitoring what's in the field, using thresholds and making decisions based on those monitoring and thresholds, using non-chemical methods where possible, so biological, cultural, and a whole range of different techniques that are at your disposal, and also there's a lot more research going into those. Going into those, and also how effective they are and what the risk of those are and how that compares with chemicals. Reduced use of chemicals where possible, and also better use of chemicals, so being more selective where possible again, and also a good and effective use of them, and Neroso and spray operators and things like that comes into that as well. Things like anti-resistant strategies, and also key is evaluation of the pest management techniques that you've used throughout the year. So whilst conditions are changing year on year, that's not an excuse to use something that didn't work last year again. So it's that whole package across the piece, and continual improvement within that. Other things for us at Leaf is I work a lot on integrated farm management, and there's a lot of jargon around that, and some of it's important and some of it's not. But for us, integrated pest management fits within integrated farm management, and with pest management you're starting with the pest, and with farm management you're starting with the farm, and there's a lot more around that as well. I think it's those range of techniques, and again, key to us, it's not just not using chemicals, it's so much more than that. And I think, we're going to hear a lot more about that from people who are much more expert in it than me.
Yep. So that's very key. This systemic approach. So one of the key components, or one of the components, is looking at biological control. Charlotte, could you tell us a little bit about different types of biological control and what that actually means in the field?
Yeah, so as I said, biological control is a component of IPM, and quite simply it's the use of biological organisms to manage pests, weeds and diseases. So typically it's broken down into predators, parasites and pathogens. So in terms of pathogens, we're generally thinking in terms of biopesticides, whereas in predators and parasitoids, the approaches are generally either augmentative biocontrol or conservation biocontrol. So augmentative biocontrol is typically used in protected cropping situations, and this is where people introduce specific natural enemies to control a specific pest problem. In terms of conservation biocontrol, that's more applicable to an open field situation, and that is where people use techniques to encourage natural enemies that are already existing in the environment into the crop to keep pest populations suppressed. So that might be in terms of field margins, cover cropping, intercropping type situations.
And as I say, we have got some cards to help with the idea of that, so we could talk a bit more about that later. So what does this look like in the field, Andy? You've been farming without insecticides for 12 years now, is that right?
Yeah, on cereals, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you go about bringing these good guys into the fields? Just a quick overview of your farming system, really, and the kind of practices you're putting into place.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on for hours on that, but because I think part of the thing, the whole system, is that we've got so used to just using one thing. You know, we see a pest, spray it, gone, dead. And in an IPM approach, in my view anyway, we need to build a whole system. And so you just stack one thing on top of another and another and another and another. And beneficials will be just one part of that. So beneficial-wise, we've been in countryside stewardship and various different types of stewardship for 20, 30 years now, but I'm also trying to be doing more and more on that to try and get as many beneficials as we can into the field. And it's all a bit vague, and I want researchers to give me more numbers on this, but one of the first things we started to do to get more beneficials is stop spraying foliar insecticides. Now, that's risky, and the first couple of years I had BYDV, and I haven't since, but who knows. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you haven't done it, that's great, and I won't spray," and he got BYDV, so I'm not you have to build them up to start with, I think. But we've been desperately trying to change our margins into something that's more suitable for beneficials, and it's really frustrating because a lot of the margins and the seed that we're sold for margins are all about pollinators, which is great. But I've been talking to the Assist project, who've been doing a lot of work on this, and they've designing more margins or in-field margins to try and encourage the beneficials. And I just can't get a seed mixture that has all the things they want in it. But so we're going to try. I've ordered some anyway. We're going to try some of that up and down in the middle of fields this time in the autumn, because we're obviously concerned. I say I haven't used insecticides on cereals for 12 years. I haven't sprayed any. I've used a deter, and the real thing I do not want to go back is to start spraying pyrethroids again. And I sprayed once on oilseed rape in those 12 years, and a few years ago we stopped spraying for bruchid as well. And yeah, I mean, I think it is helping. It's very, you encourage beneficials by all sorts of other things, though, by not spraying, by doing the margins, by no-till, I mean, there's a whole load of work, obviously every time you disrupt the soil, you're disrupting the beneficials. And if you can build a kind of ecosystem from the bottom up, then that will help. I mean, you can go on and on. I think the whole system, we don't spray T0 fungicides, we spray and cut down on our fungicides, because we don't want to, damage fungi that may help us and be beneficial fungi, not just beneficial insects. So we go on and on.
Brilliant. And so within the Assist project, what kind of, so you're doing some trials within that, is that right?
I'm not trialing with them, I'm a bit too far away, unfortunately, for them, but I'm going to try myself, yeah.
And what kind of spacings have you got those in-row strips on?
Yeah, well, we haven't got them yet. I'm trying in the autumn, because obviously we're losing deter on the cereals that we were using, and we've got to think, don't want to go back to spraying, so yeah, we're good. So if you do it the theory is the beneficials go about 50 metres, so if you do your strips every 100 metres, then you should cover it.
Yeah.
I don't know, got to find out.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So Rothamsted are partners with CEH on the Assist project, so I'll come to your farm and monitor you. We are trialling infield strips, and they're 96 metres apart generally to fit with machinery, but plus or minus. That's just because we believe the beetles in particular move about 50 metres away, so we're having those strips at 96 metres. It's a very complicated mixture. It's too complicated for my liking, I believe, and I would like to say that there aren't any commercial varieties out there that are suited particularly for predators and natural enemies. So, and the research to understand what these natural enemies need is still at the early stages. So it's going to take some time to be able to optimise these margins for pollinators. and birds and bees, which is what the margins are specifically designed for at the moment, and get those to also be able to deliver pest management services as well.
Yeah, and so without wanting you to list the entire species list, as it's quite complex, I'm sure, what are kind of some of the main species within those mixtures, or what kind of species should we be looking to get beneficials into our system?
So as I said, we're still researching on those, but in the margins at the moment, things like oxeye daisies, which are nice open flowers, which parasitic wasps find easy to access the nectar from those. So open, kind of like daisy-like flowers. Cornflowers are really good. They've got lots of really great quality nectar in for parasitic wasps as well. Butterflies, they like cornflowers as well. We've got crimson clover, which is it's quite early flowering. It's quite good. We're trying to get flowers to flower throughout the whole season, so we're really concentrating on early flowers and late flowers. A lot of the natural enemies are specific to crop pests. They only parasitise or prey on those specific crop pests. So brassicas, brassica natural enemies of brassica pests need brassicas in the margin. So we've got things like kale and fodder radishes. So it depends if it's an annual or a perennial margin as well. So.
Yep, makes sense. And so something I think is really interesting, you mentioned there kind of getting brassica species, is this idea of push-pull. So whereby you've got something within the crop to push away the pest and something on the outside to pull it out. Is there any work being done on that, or Andy, I think you've been trying something on farm as well?
Yeah, I mean, I got the idea off Sam, so most of our ideas come from someone else. But no, we tried it with kale actually, and we put kale margins all around the outside of an oilseed rape field. And I thought I'd have to get rid of them, and they were completely destroyed by flea beetle, absolutely hammered. But we also had our oilseed rape with beans in the middle of the field, and we got away with it in the middle of the field, so that was good. And then once the kale was completely destroyed, we planted Vasilia in the spring, and it looked very nice and had lots of bees in it.
Yeah.
So no, we are, but I'm trying. I've got some white mustard that I'm going to plant, and maybe not do it. I'm not sure whether to do it all around the outside or just do it in the southwest corner, or what the best way to do it is. But obviously, ADAS have also been doing some work on using volunteer oilseed rape as trap crops, and so I'll be leaving a nearby oilseed rape stubble to grow up and try and get the flea beetle to fly into there, and then the theory is once they've landed, they put the energy away from the wings, which you've probably heard of, and so they can't fly any further. But we have tried it a little bit. We had some success, and we've got to keep working on it.
Yeah. And did you mention you've got a white mustard crop on the outside of the...
I'm going to try that this year instead of the kale, just because people have been doing work with white mustard as a companion crop, and it seems that that's quite attractive to the flea beetle. I'm trying to keep the flea beetle out. I suppose it's push-pull, where do you pull them to and from? But my theory is we put the beans, put some beans and peas in the middle, and if the theory is they're looking at it as visual and olfactory or volatile cues, so smelling it basically, and if we can confuse them as much as possible and keep them out of the middle and into the edges.
Yeah. And what about from a research perspective, Sam? Is that something you've worked on?
So we developed a turnip rape trap crop initially for pollen beetles. So it's understanding, if you understand what the insect, how it comes to the crop, how it finds the crop, due to basically visual or olfactory or smell cues. If you understand that and then try to disrupt it, that's how you can then start to reduce the numbers in the crop. So turnip rape, it's Brassica rapa, so it's a very close relative of Brassica napus, which is not oilseed rape, but it's a lighter green colour, and it smells quite strongly, and the pollen beetles love it. So we know that pollen beetles come into the field from the edge, so if you plant the trap crop around the edge, then the beetles that's the first thing they see, they land on there and they stay there, enabling the crop to grow past its damage susceptible stage, and then they move gradually in. But if you do want to spray, then you only have to spray a very small area around the outside of your crop rather than the whole crop. But we did find that it reduced beetles to way below the spray threshold level. In oilseed rape, we found that turnip rape was also very highly attractive to flea beetle. But flea beetle tend to come into the middle of the crop, so they don't tend to colonise from the outside. So you might want to put a strip in the middle or something like that. With the white mustard idea, that's intersown with the brassicas. I find that a little bit dangerous because you're waiting for winter kill to kill it off. We've tried it twice now at Rothamsted. We're down in the south, and we didn't get winter kill, so we were wound up with a load of mustard. I tried to grow Clearfield variety, and it didn't work for us. So maybe up in the north where you get nice cold winters, then that might work well. So yeah, there are other arrangements of highly preferred plants that you can move the pests away, or then you try to repel them. So with things like berseem clover mixes have been tried, again with varying success. So yeah, it's still a learning game.
Yeah, work in progress. And I was over in France recently, and speaking to some also rape growers over there while we were on. And what I found interesting was variety mixtures. So it's quite common over there to be able to buy variety mixed seed with basically a trap crop, an earlier flowering variety that will trap the pollen beetle. They'll go through that stage of their life cycle, and then they're pollinators basically, so they become a beneficial. What's stopping us from doing more of that here, and are any of you aware of anyone doing that?
Personally, I think it's a strategy that might work, but if you've got a large population, then those single plants that are right in the middle of your field, they're going to attract the insects right into the middle of your field. And if there's a large population, then those plants will be overwhelmed with beetles and they'll spread out. So I don't personally like that arrangement as much as a trap crop around the outside of the field or in a particular area, because then you're more able to control them in a smaller space. And if they get out of control, you can do something about it. You don't need to spray. Maybe just chop it down or something.
Yeah, I've tried varietal mixtures, and we did some rape varietal mixtures as well. And in keeping with a lot of my experiments, they worked very well one year, and we thought we cracked it, and then they were worse the next year. And whether it's because I carefully, the first year I tried it, I just bunged a load of seed in that we had from anywhere, and had a nice mixture, and it worked much better. And the second year I carefully designed it, and it did worse. So whether that's because I designed it so we had a change in flowering period, and maybe we just attracted more pests in. But I haven't found it from a pest point of view. I've just tried it from a yield point of view and a more of a disease IPM point of view.
Mm-hmm. And is there any challenges with markets with variety mixtures, or is it?
Oh well, obviously oilseed rape was no issue. I tried it with various different wheats. I tried it with soft wheats. I tried it with milling wheat, but and I didn't have a problem. I mean, all mine goes to a local co-op, and we have a wheat. I'm involved in a local co-op, and we do have a variety-specific bins, but we also have a bin with mixed varieties, because some markets will take mixed varieties. The only thing with that is I think you've got to be careful with, I don't know, probably lots of people have tried more than I have here, but in that instance we tried 3 different milling varieties, and what we ended up with was more septoria in that mix, because it went for the lowest common denominator, which was a variety called Trinity, and that had more septoria than the Skyfall or the Crusoe. So I don't know, there's a lot of I mean, up in John Innes, I mean, they say, why doesn't everyone grow varietal mixtures, and can't understand it, but I've had mixed success.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So just an observation. I mean, you asked it, what is integrated pest management to kick us off, and something that's just really come out for me from some of what we've heard here is how much of it is experimentation and trialling new things. And whilst that can be very, very exciting, and to hear Andy talk about what he's doing on farm, it is very knowledge intensive and it's very knowledge hungry, and also you've got to be reactive and responsive to what's happening at the time. Less and less are people able to farm by the calendar. You have to farm by your conditions. But that brings issues in terms of what the risk factor is, the unknown. So again, just fab to hear how much is going on with Sam's work and all around the country with Assist and CEH, and also that some of those theories happening out on farm to see what that looks like, and also what the other lesser known consequences are. You asked about markets, all very well if we can reduce pests, but actually if you've then got a crop you can't sell, then nobody's a winner. So yeah, just to add that in.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to follow on from that, from Alice. I mean, the whole concept with IPM, there is this inherent risk that underpins everything because it is so experimental, and this is, forms quite a lot of the work that we do, speaking with DEFRA ministers and DEFRA themselves, and they do actually realise and acknowledge that there is this inherent risk to IPM to doing things differently. And so we're in discussions with them at the moment, and Andy mentioned about stewardship schemes. We're sort of trying to help them formulate how they're developing the ELM systems that's coming in to replace some of the current stewardship schemes.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that, and I think we should all, if there's anyone from DEFRA here especially, but everyone here, I mean, we're preaching to the converted a bit here, but we've got with DEFRA, with the new ELM scheme, have got the power in their hands to make all these things work. You can pay for in-field strips. You can pay for research. There's been so little research on IPM. It's all been driven by chemical industry, and that's where the money is. And who no one benefits. No one can sell trap cropping. So we really need to put the pressure on everyone that we see from DEFRA to try and get some research behind this, and also make a scheme. It's so easy, you could easily make a scheme, DEFRA, that would really boost wildlife on the whole of the country, and let's hope they do and don't cock it up like they did last time.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this support for farmers to take that risk and to learn is really important.
Can I just add? Rothamsted have just started a new scheme called Farm In. There's some leaflets on the tables. It's to try to help farmers that have got an idea that they think that might work for sustainability, and there's a small grant that will help to take some of the risk out of that for the farmer, and it will link up to a research institute somewhere in the country to try to understand the science behind what they're trying to do. So I just wanted to...
Fantastic, yeah, it sounds like a great scheme. Just go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think right at the start of this session, we realised that a lot of you are already doing IPM, and in terms of the voluntary initiative and our interaction with government, one of the major problems that we have is that a lot of the decisions that you make, IPM decisions for not applying an insecticide, for example, they're just not recorded. So this is a huge problem for us, and we're also trying to develop, I think Katie was going to ask me about the Ipm Plan later, but I'll mention it now. One of the VI schemes is the Ipm Plan, which those of you in Red Tractor have to address every year. But at the moment, the Ipm Plan is little more than a tick box exercise, which people do, and it gets put in a drawer and not looked at until the next Red Tractor visit the following year. So what we're trying to do is to make that a much more interactive exercise, so it's something that you have to come back to through the season and re-evaluate where you are, try some different things, depending on the actual pest and disease levels in a particular season. And in terms of recording, we've realised that we don't really want to reinvent the wheel, so we're taking this to the agricultural software manufacturers, and we're hoping that one way of us sort of influencing what you do on the farm is that, you know, rather than having a separate system, we could maybe integrate that with the likes of Muddy Boots or Farmgate.
On that note, what about monitoring? So how do we, is monitoring part of this, and how do we go about monitoring the pests and also perhaps the beneficials within our cropping systems? Charlotte?
Yeah, monitoring is really important in terms of IPM, because obviously if you don't know what you've got in your crop, then how can you make a decision on how to manage it? So AHDB run some insect monitoring programs at a national level, things like aphid news for monitoring cereal aphids in the autumn, things like the yellow water trapping for potato aphids and viruses. And these are at a national level, and they are to give you a heads up as to when activity is happening and to go and actually check your crops in the field, because obviously at a local level pest numbers are going to vary on a field by field basis. So it's really important that farmers and agronomists are working together to do that in-field monitoring, that crop walking, to understand what's going on in the field. And like we've been saying, it's all about sort of evaluating as the season progresses as to how you manage that.
Can I just say that there isn't currently any monitoring for natural enemies. The advice that you get from AHDB is excellent advice on how to monitor your crops for pests, but we all know that there are lots of natural enemies out there, and it's something that really struck home for me when I was developing a pollen beetle monitoring trap. So you can buy these from Ecos. They've got a special lure that lures the pollen beetle to the trap, so it's excellent for pollen beetle monitoring. When I tried it out as part of the development phase on volunteer farmers across the UK, Andy participated in that trial, and he sent his traps back, and there were barely any pollen beetles on the traps, but there were loads and loads and loads of parasitic wasps, which are going to take those pollen beetles out and do the pest regulation job for you. So I do think as an industry that's something we need to get much better at, is understanding not only how many pests have we got in our crop, but how many natural enemies have we got, and maybe take that into consideration in our spray thresholds, because often you don't need to spray because there are insects in the crop that are going to do the job for you.
Yeah, that was really interesting, what we did with you, and lots of farmers did it as well, didn't they? But it was really monitoring. You need the time, which is a tricky bit, but it was really interesting on the pollen beetle, because I went in twice a week on how Sam designed it, and say the threshold was here, and the pollen beetle numbers would go up, and probably most, agronomists, particularly agronomists who are perhaps selling the chemical, would say, right, spray now, and I was not going to spray anyway, and they just go up, and then they come down, and then they go up, and then they come down, and it's made clear to me that there was no need to spray for pollen beetle at all. But really, monitoring is going to be, what I like the sound of is things like the Septoria spore trap and things like that are being developed, so that you just put it in the field and then it sends you something on your phone that says, right, now is the time, because it took a lot of time, that pollen beetle monitoring, and it's really useful, but to do it all the time is tricky.
There are some now tools outside. If you look on the web, there are tools to make monitoring easier. So there's some now apps on your phone that will tell you the amount of leaf area eaten of some crops. There's tools that will now start to automatically identify the pests that you've caught in yellow water traps. So that will make monitoring a lot easier. And at Rothamsted, we're working on it's a bit out there, but it's called LiDAR, which is a red laser. Basically a laser pointer. The insects fly through the beam. They're automatically identified, pests and beneficials. So maybe watch this space for monitoring beneficials.
Well, I'll pass it over to you guys now. Have we got any questions, Edward?
Question for Andy and others. Surely mixing the same crops together, it's still a monocrop, whether it's wheat varieties, still a crop of wheat. Surely the way forward is to mix the crops and then have the equipment to separate them. And on the IPM front, things like I had charlock in my linseed, which, you know, it attracted all the flea beetle, and the charlock was absolutely shot-holed to pieces. So I left it as long as I could before I sprayed it out, and now I've sprayed it out, I noticed there are a few flea beetle attacking the linseed, but it is in flower. But I feel that farming, we're all, especially the older farmers, they like perfect crops, and I think we've got to get to the wonky veg theory, as I'd call it. We're not going to have perfect crops if we are going to do the IPM public good bit. So we've got to have crops that have got to have a few virus bits and bobs in it, just because we can't be perfect farmers if we're going to have a balanced natural environment. You know, you're going to have aphids, and then you're going to have the beneficials. You can't have the beneficials first. You've got to have some problems for them to balance each other out.
Any I guess, yeah, from my side, I think it is the shift to thinking about gross margin versus thinking about yield as well. So it's like, if we can reduce our inputs, then thinking about, you know, trying to get over some of those things about how the crop's looking and what is the threshold and economic threshold.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that. Moving away from sort of feeling like you have to sterilise the whole environment and then grow your crop, rather than and moving towards a place where you're working with the environment to grow what's there. Obviously, there's huge issues around market with that, and what the market expects and what it's looking for. But I think there's as the shift, and we need to bring the market along with us on that front to some extent. And then I'm sure Andy, I think, can talk about it more, but in terms of different crops and intercropping and that kind of thing, that's a really exciting space at the moment. But again, we've got to be aware of the environment that you're in to make sure that you can separate the crops at the end of it, or that you can deal with what's there, rather than just producing something that is good for the soil and good for everything, but isn't creating what you need at the end of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We need a huge change of mindset, don't we? And probably we're preaching to converted again. But you know, we've always had ploughing matches, and we have crop competitions. And like you were saying, you know, you go into the crop, and I've judged crop competitions, and we're judging them on being completely and utterly clean of anything else apart from that crop. And we've got to get away from that. And I had a countryside stewardship inspection last year, and I got bits of my field taken out of BPS because he deemed them having scrub on them, you know, and he wanted me to mow them down to the edge, you know. And we've got to get completely away from that whole mindset, and not have perfect in the old way of looking things farms. I mean, yeah, I agree with you on the cropping and the mixed cropping as well. And I did my basis some years ago now, and I did it on intercropping. And there was good evidence even then. I mean, this is another thing that frustrates me. So I was did my basis about 15 years ago. I was looking at research about 15 years before that, and they were doing research on intercropping wheat with clover and getting a reduction in septoria because of reduced rain splash. But they were also getting a little bit more ice spot because of humidity at the bottom. So there's a lot of things we've got to learn. And as far as the whole actually growing two crops at one, and you'll know Andy Howard, one of my close neighbours, has done a lot of work on that, and Nuffield Scholarship. It's getting, I don't know if he's around, but it's getting the gross, you know, you've got to make the money as well, haven't you? So it's the costs involved as well.
Yeah, I'm working with Andy Howard on as part of Innovative Farmers Field Lab on intercropping. And if you're not aware, he has got an on-farm separator that he's made himself with a cleaner, and that's obviously not for everybody, but it is part of it is one of the options. Also in France, again, I know that the buyers will do some of the separation, so it's also thinking about how do we get more progressive in terms of how we manage some of these processes. Absolutely. And interestingly, within the field lab, so this year Andy's got a mixture of linseed and oats, trying to control flax flea beetle, and we just went out and did some assessments and put some of the yellow water traps that Charlotte was talking about, which I handmade with some spray paint and some old takeaway tubs, so you can all make your own. But what we found was that there was reduced pest damage in the linseed that was together with the oats, and we also saw it was further along growth stage. We don't know what the mechanism is. There was also a higher level of establishment. So we're going to be following that, and you will be able to follow that on Agricology and through the field lab. And then, start to try and unpick what's happening there. Another question.
Hi. I was wondering, have you any work done on slugs for drawing in beneficials for crops? Like, we're growing brassicas in some of our cover crops, and it seems to be expelling them or making them more of a problem with them. So all of you, really.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any scientific work. There is scientific work being done on slugs, isn't there? But the tricky bit is finding something really positive you can do to stop them, isn't it? And when I first went into no-till, my slug populations went up, no doubt about it, and then they were coming down and down and down, and I thought, this is all right, we've obviously got something in balance here, and then last year, in the hottest, driest year we've had for ages, they suddenly went up again, and it may be they were all just down below, and then as soon as it rained they came up. So I haven't got many answers for me on that. I've had the same thing with radishes and things in cover crops, and we've increased slugs. I hesitate to say it, but we have to. I mean, straw raking. I used to straw rake my oilseed rape stubbles, and I think it helped, and I think it did do something. But we don't want to. I was then dragging around weed seed and pulling up flints as well. So now I'm going to try something with a wavy disc, maybe just to do some mechanical control, perhaps on the slugs. But no, I wish I had some more answers on slug control.
Any more questions?
Carabid beetles. Carabid beetles eat slugs. We're monitoring slugs as part of the ASSIST programme, and we do see slugs coming out the margins, and we see them in our cover crops that we're trialling as well. But carabid beetles like slugs, so anything that you can do, tussocky grass margins to benefit carabid beetles. They also, carabid beetle larvae, live in the soil, and they also take small slugs as well. And I do think the larvae were really knocked back by the drought last year, so that might be a reason why that. I don't know. It's just a theory I've got, but yeah, for any pest that you can mention, there is a natural control. So just cling on to that fact.
And so tillage and those larvae then is there an impact of tillage on larvae like that in the soil?
We're still looking at the effects of tillage, and again, this is something that needs to be analysed properly. But there does seem to be an effect of tillage in affecting the carabid beetles and slugs, but also the natural enemies of oilseed rape pests, the parasitic wasps. They drop to the ground to pupate in the soil. So if you plough after your oilseed rape before the wheat goes in, you're burying all those parasitic wasp cocoons, and they're unable to emerge. So we have found very, very strong evidence for parasitic wasps that no-till benefits those natural enemies of oilseed rape pests.
Fascinating. Sorry, Neal, I cut you off there.
No, I was just on the slugs. It's just a signpost you actually. There's some really interesting work going on at Harper Adams. Keith Walters and his students, they're actually using micro chips that you would put in your dog or your cat, and they're putting them in slugs, and then they're following where the slugs are going in the field, and they're finding that there's the main problem is that they are aggregated, so they're looking to see if there's a pattern to this aggregation, and whether there's a way of actually treating those patches rather than having to treat the whole field. So Google Harper Adams and slugs and you will see the work. Well, they're here apparently, so go and speak with them.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Yeah, chuck down there.
John. John Lander's zero tillage pioneer from Brazil. I didn't hear anyone talking about liberation of bred parasitic wasps. We're doing a very good job in Brazil on controlling caterpillars in soybeans. But I did a pilot project with farmers about 5 years ago, and the important thing I see with integrated pest management and biological controls is that the decision-making process with a chemical is very easy. But when you're looking at biological controls, whether they're natural or introduced, you have to forecast how the population of the predators is going to develop and whether you get to a threshold situation or not. So how are you dealing with that question of how the farmer makes his decision in integrated pest management with natural controls? And just a quick one on slugs. Has anyone tried broadcasting KCL at night? Because the slugs die with it.
So the question about monitoring natural enemies, sort of what we were talking about before, we don't actually have any sort of natural enemy threshold, so to speak. And that's probably an area of research that we need to address, and how we best monitor natural enemies. And it will always come back to being able to monitor the pest as well, because you need to know the balance between the two. In terms of slugs, I don't know about the KCL. I don't know if anybody's trying that or the legal issues around it. But just going back to what we were talking about before as well, a key component of slug management is getting the crop established well, getting it away. And I think this comes down to this sort of holistic approach to IPM, is that you need to not just think about a top-down control, but a soil health approach, a nutrition approach to building a tolerant crop. And obviously not just a perfect looking crop, but one that can withstand pest pressure like grazing from slugs and still yield well. So there is a lot of thinking around that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on the decision-making process, because I think that is a real crux of the issue with integrated pest management. And you asked sort of more specifically around monitoring, but just around the decision-making process in general in integrated pest management. That's a key focus of our tool, the Leaf Sustainable Farming Review, to question what farmers are doing in various areas to help help make better decisions for their farm, not necessarily direct them, but just put you in a better space to consider more areas. And that's certainly where the integrated pest management plan that Neal mentioned earlier will be going as well, when you look at pest management as a whole, to help with some of those decision-making processes.
We do also have a range of resources on the Agricology website, in terms of technical guides from different research institutes and farmer experience, to help with that process as well. We've got time for one more question. See if yeah, you get your second question.
Do very healthy crops deter pests?
Yeah, I mean, I think the people are saying they are, aren't they? And if we haven't got ammonium or nitrate in the crops, then they're less attractive to the insects. And that's a really interesting thing to me as far as cabbage-stone flea beetles are concerned, because what do we do when we're trying to get our RC rate? We always put a lot of nitrogen into it, don't we, to start with? And are we attracting them? I don't know. We need to find out. I mean, there's one thing with the no-till, of course, as a lot of us know here, that instead of getting these crops when you were ploughing and parrying, they're going to go boom like that and are really green and on the go, we get more prostrate crops. And, are they less, we hope they are less attractive to the pests. But also what we're doing is done for many years is doing a lot of tissue testing, you know, and then finding out what's lacking and applying it and trying to keep them as healthy as possible. And other people will be doing things like the bricks testing, won't they, to see. And there's a lot of people claiming that if you've got a bricks over 14 or whatever, then you're not going to be attractive to insect pests. But what I would like to see is some more hard numbers and there's rather than anecdotal and saying this ought to work, get it more out in the mainstream and give it to farmers. Most importantly, get that research out to farmers and on farms so we can all make positive decisions about how to not spray and make these decisions from the start. We know we're going to get Savage Strength Flea Beetle, and there's not going to be one thing we do. It's not just companion cropping, that's it. You know, stack them all on top of each other. All the things I've been talking about as well. We're going to put muck on as well, because we think if it's down to olfactory things, it confuses them with the muck. We also do think we're going to try to spray some garlic on. You know, we're going to put bacillus on the seed, things like this, and just stack it up and up and up. And a lot of those things may be dead ends, but in a systems approach, a lot of them are dead ends. You've just got to try as many things as possible and you give you the best chance of succeeding.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time. We've got a bit of time at the end here to come over and have a look at the different beneficial insects. We have got some samples of real natural enemies, and then also some pictures, and we'll be on hand to talk to you about those. Do also stick around. We've got another session after this talking about getting out of commodity traps, so looking at what markets are there for diverse cropping systems.